Hi, this is David. Welcome to Stitch Creative. Today we're going to be talking about finding a business-oriented creative. The reason for this workshop is essentially I was at a business trip one time coming back, flying out from Colorado back to San Diego. And on the car there, we had a founder CEO sitting with me. He was expressing to me some of the problems he was facing, and one of them was he had hired two creatives in his team. As creatives, usually you're not a very business-oriented person. It's very rare to have, these unicorns that are both business-oriented and creative-oriented. And he was just expressing to me how hard it was to work with these creative people, and how hard it was to, get them on the same time schedule as you, because sometimes they'll be working in odd hours and not showing up to meetings because they're not very good at time management or something along those lines, not very well versed in more of the corporate environment and, object and deadline and all that, finding a business-oriented creative. Specifically on how to identify and hire the right people for your in-house creative team. So if we look at this diagram here, we'll realize that business-oriented people and creative-oriented people are usually on two sides of the spectrum when it comes to that. For a very long period, I think I was also just part of the creative side, and it was not until I started my video production company that I understood more about the business side and the business-oriented side of the how everything works. There's a very huge gap between the two. If you're a rapidly growing company and you're thinking of finding going in-house and hiring a video team, or maybe just a content team and a creative team, an extension to your marketing, potentially you are looking to hire someone who is more of a business-oriented creative and not just any creative out there. We come in many different sizes and flavors, and usually it's very hard to explain the corporate world to a creative who isn't very well versed into that system yet, right? And so there's a lot of training that needs to happen. Like, it's not necessarily on their creative side, but it's rather that there's a lot of things that you need to implement into their training more into the business side. A lot of them are going to be a blank slate when it comes to the business-oriented side. As creatives, we usually are, freelancers. Most of us haven't worked for, big corporate environments. We're a bit like rebels, so there's going to be a lot of things that you need to sort of adjust your creative team on to get them to, become a well-oiled machine towards the end of it. So we really want to find people who can live in this sort of space, into that unicorn space, right? Like, we want them to be able to not just be creatively oriented, but we also want them to be business oriented at the same time. And that perfect little match is sort of the unicorns you're trying to look for, right? First, I want to show you guys the difference between the business-oriented and the creative-oriented, and you can kind of like see where the problem kind of lays in. So for business-oriented, right? So if you are a marketing director, if you are a CEO, founder who's leading your first creative team, I think a lot of things that are going to differ from you guys are on the business side. Usually we are result focused, so we want to make people act. Like, let's say if we were shooting a ad campaign, a video commercial, anything like that, what you're looking for is probably something more result focused. You want to make people act, right? You want to make people follow, convert, join the community, buy a product, all sorts of these indicator of your success. And for creatives, it's a little bit different. So for creatives, usually we're more audience focused. So we are more concerned about how how a graphic or how a logo or how a video is making people feel. There's a lot of emotional attachment to it, right? So we want to see how that's affecting people. Not to say that if you're business oriented, you don't care about that, but those emotions need to be able to provoke an action for you guys. The outcome of that is that there's going to be a misalignment in your guys' motives. So for businesses, you want results. For creatives, you want to make people feel a certain way. You can see how that derails the purpose behind the video. It's a really good idea to allow your creatives to understand that there is an action that needs to be taken in creating these videos, and sometimes just verbally saying that doesn't really help, right? I mean, as creatives are concerned more about a engagement rate rather than a conversion rate. ROI, as you'll see later on, I'll talk about it, but essentially we're more concerned about how to get people feel a certain way rather than act a certain way, right? And by act, I mean they're going to take an immediate action. When you're business oriented, usually you're looking at efficiency and time. There's like deadlines. We try to replicate success, right? So if something's working, we want to optimize that and make it repeatable. As a business owner, you'd probably be running into things like SOPs, systematizing things, making step-by-step guides, making sure everything has a certain workflow so it can be replicated, reproduced. And then when it comes to creatives, they want to be more detail and craft oriented. So it's more about perfection and the work itself. And that can be, very detrimental to a business, especially if you're trying to, get on those deadlines and trying to get actual outcomes. The result of that is there's going to be, missed deadlines because your creative is still trying to, get that extra maybe 1% out of the project, trying to make sure that it looks as something presentable to them as work. So just having that in mind, that I think we should set up clear deadlines to them and let them know that, this thing needs to be completed before the time. It's very hard to tell a creative that you're trying to replicate a trend or replicate success of someone else who is doing something. And the reason for that is just because creatives consider that as a infringement almost of, copyright. You're trying to, reference over someone's work, but it's more of like, oh, you're just trying to create the same thing that they're creating. As creatives, when it comes to our work, it feels kind of a little bit, even I'll go as far as to say it's almost a little egotistical. I really just want to create something unique. Unique sometimes doesn't necessarily sell as well because unique is also a very experimental thing that's happening, and you're a lot of self-expression and a lot of like individualism in it, and so it might not be the thing that resonates with more people. Sometimes it might be something that only resonates with a really small group. All of these add up and compound to becoming, you're missing your deadlines, you're not able to necessarily repeat the process of the work because your creative is probably not recording down how they did something. You can see like just from here, there's a lot of battles that are going on between the business and the creative. There's a lot of clash between concepts, right? Not to necessarily say one is better than the other, but when we put it into a business context, there are just these things that you need to ground your creative to understand. And that might be something like giving them either a business class, right? A business coaching, whatever they need to get into that zone of understanding. And this might take a while. So when you are looking for those type of people, you need to find the ones that actually understand how to be efficient and have time in mind, and they can't necessarily become perfectionists, get too attached to the work at hand. For creatives, like every piece they make is kind of like their baby, right? And they try to get it as best as possible. That's kind of how you have to approach the conversations with them about it. And the ones that actually, like people who are more in the commercial side of the field, start to understand that there's so much work that's happening that that little process is really not as significant as they might have thought it would have been, especially like in 2024, 2025 coming up. Like the world has so much content, it has so much art, it has so much video work or whatever that's happening, right? Graphics, logos, that feels like there's a huge sea of them right now. But also, like, to still have that in mind, it's not necessarily saying that that's a bad thing for you. Maybe as a business, you do want to push that creativity. Sometimes you might want to allow them to do certain projects that showcase their best work. I think as a business, it's really important to understand that to have those, certain projects set aside, those bigger projects that you're going to put the time in and put the determination into actually making it a very elevated, a very high quality project, to give your in-house creatives that opportunity to, grow and showcase their skill and actually, create a project that they love. I think that's something that you want to position in the beginning of your conversations when, maybe even just when hiring them or part of your implementation into your business system, is to have those projects that are meant to be more creatively driven. And that way, if you can balance it out with, you have business objective videos or logos or graphics or creative assets that need to be done in a timely manner, as fast as possible, so that you can meet deadlines for a launch or for a trend or project campaign. Those need to be handled as quickly as possible. And then you also set aside time for them to work on projects that will be more like brand pieces, and have them take their time and into their creative development, into their work, into their process, and allow them that growth so they don't burn out just from being efficient and lose their sort of creativity along the way, right? So being efficient and timely is one side, but there's also a drop in quality or their creativity. So we want to sort of balance that out, offering opportunities to do these wild card projects so that they feel more creatively fulfilled as a creative. Let them know that there's those opportunities, but also there are times, and most of their time is going to be spent being more efficient and working on progressing their skills. Don't frame the project as each piece needs to be a masterpiece. It's more about getting progression on each piece, so that when the bigger projects come up, or when they have enough repetition in, that the projects become better projects over time. Obviously, no one starts off being the best at anything. There's going to be, you guys are going to have to spend time kind of getting to know each other, getting to work with each other and tangle that into the system, right? To operate it, to have it function so it doesn't lose its creativity, but it also doesn't lose efficiency when it's required, right? Another big thing is businesses are more concerned about the business growth of a project, right? So we were talking about it, like replicating success. Think about it that way from the business side. You're looking to replicate success, and you're looking for scale up your company. And then when creatives do their projects, it's more about, creatives look more into doing things like experimentation, right? So they're constantly trying to create new ideas, new things, and with new things, there is a level of risk involved. Results might vary because one side we're trying to replicate success and one side we're trying to experiment. Like, it's the same as the last one. We want to try to offer those opportunities where they can try to perfect their work where they want to be craftsmen or feel creatively fulfilled, and give them those opportunities, give them those wild cards that they can create new things with, right? And play with that. And just to keep a healthy creative team that's still, growing and figuring out new things out when they're doing so. But we don't want it to hinder our, business growth that's happening. So we want to have things that are put on repeat when we find them. And then we want to have things that we're testing out that are new, right? So sometimes you want to treat them as an R&D team. So they're doing research and development. Sometimes you want to treat them as, your trusty functional team. And so you want them to replicate success. And that's just something that also needs to be drilled into their training session, right? It's just like these things are expectations that you kind of need to give your employees to let them know that, hey, this is what we need to do. Businesses are looking to scale. Businesses are looking for ROI. We all want to have things that aren't going to flunk or fail, and we want them to become better and better, essentially, right? For creatives, there's a big chunk of ideas of artistic growth is really important to them, right? So there's that creative fulfillment that they're seeking outside of just business growth, right? If a creative had all the money in the world, they probably would just go and experiment on different projects and, grow their craft and not work for a business anymore. And so the reason they are out of business is usually because either they're running out of money, it's a hard industry, so if you wanted to go full on creative as a freelancer or as an artist or as a film director, your own agency, and at their current stage, since they don't have all the business skills, they might not be able to do that. So it's really important to have that in mind when you're having these conversations with your creative team, that these are the things they're thinking about, right? They're thinking about the emotional value. How is it making people feel? How is it perceived as a work? Is it showing my craftsmanship? Is it perfect? There's a lot of perfectionism problems within creatives. Is the work interesting? Does it excite them? And then there's a lot of experimentation aspects to it, right? They like to take risks, they're bold, and they want to try new things, and they want to have artistic growth. So they want to be able to creatively feel fulfilled. They want to be growing as a creative. They want to, do better projects. So if you're constantly giving them the same thing, they start to feel bored, and they feel like it's just like a mental thing, right? They're like, I can't perform the same project 10 times over again, because their minds aren't hardwired that way. So here's a few things that you can do to get those alignments straightened out, right? So how do we solve for these conflicts? One of the things that we can start doing with them is, this is what you should be doing with anything in your business, but having them create SOPs. And I would just start with having them talk about their process, essentially, right, on how they get to a result. This is the same thing as what you would ask, if you were starting off and you ask your employees to do this. In the other sectors, it's the same exact thing. It's like, hey, what is your, system and processes? How do you do what you do? Write it down. Let's see how we can incorporate that into the business side. One of the other things is having workshops, and not just creative workshops, but more workshops in regards to business, right, for creatives. Because a lot of times creatives actually don't lack any of their creativity skills. Like a lot of them actually lack an understanding for business fundamentals on how to fulfill, on how to operate, on how to talk to other coworkers, because usually a lot of them are probably freelancing. A lot of them probably don't have a team, and they've been working by themselves for a long time. And when you bring them onto the team, and then they're probably also introverts, I don't know, but you bring them onto the team, and now there's like suddenly all these people, departments that they've never encountered and they have to talk to. And so they're like new fish in the water. And so just giving them a basic rundown on how the business system works. I know it sounds really weird to teach business to creatives, but that's kind of something you have to implement, at least have them have a foundation level understanding of how their creative assets or how their creativity plays a role into the the company structure. I think that's very needed when it comes to getting a in-house team more organized or more on the same page as a business, right? As a business owner, you probably want that to be happening with them. Another thing is you want to break down barriers, and by that I mean you want to demystify some of the stigmas that maybe creatives or maybe you have on creatives. Running a business can be as creative as, doing a creative form of art or doing like, media content or whatever it is that your creative team you're hiring for is going to do. But it's really important that we don't start off in the wrong page, that we understand that we're coming in together as a cohesive unit to try to solve issues together, right? And sometimes it's going to take a little bit more work on your side as a business owner to figure out how to communicate that to someone who's not oriented in the business field. And, it's going to take them some time to adapt into the business system. And everything we're doing here is really just trying to speed up that process. And then maybe out of the year, you want to do a couple of wild card projects. A good example of this would be projects that are more towards branding, or maybe it's more towards educational or community building, that we are not trying to find some hard result and we don't have as much of a push on timeline, or if we just want to have this piece done very, very well and we want to dedicate the time to it when we have those types of projects. So your creatives can balance out from not just doing result-driven work all the time, but actually have more creative fulfillment and experimentation and be able to, grow in their own roles. That would be great as well. And then there is another thing I didn't really put on the list. Your creative team eventually should grow into a whole department, and there should be the right creatives in the right seats to manage that department. It would be really beneficial. Not that everyone needs to do this, but it would be beneficial if you started with hiring a more business-oriented creative to manage your other creatives who might be more towards the creative side of the scale, to bridge that gap between the two. So having that unicorn come in first, hiring the rest of the crew for full-on creativity, right? That would be someone like in the film industry, that would be like a producer, right? Maybe in the creative marketing field, it might be a creative director, maybe a content manager, someone who has both the assets to be a business-oriented and a creative-oriented person. So having that person lead the team of your creatives, and then having creatives under him or her who is more specialized in just being a creative person, will probably save you a lot more time. But I still think that anything from getting them to, record their SOPs, getting them into business workshops so that they can understand the business side of it more, having them participate in potentially their own meetings, because sometimes they'll be focused on doing something and they might miss your meeting, and so at least having that one person on your team who is more of a unicorn, and to be able to manage a whole different sector of creative language that you as a business owner or your rest of the team departments doesn't really speak that language. Having that one person to delegate to, so that you're not directly having to deal with explaining the business plan to the creative. Having that one person who understands the business plan and is able to translate it into a more creative result, pulling it into more of a creative outcome, that would be an ideal situation.